Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today in this fireside chat on Dickies, Genericana, and 100 Years in Design. My name is Hector Ramirez, and I'm a graphic designer, a typography enthusiast, and I'm a part of a TRIPTK team, a global brand strategy agency. We are TRIPTK, are a huge team of designers, futurists, strategists, and semioticians that that get really excited about the power of culture nowadays. We use culture as our cheat code to create enduring brands.
Hi there, I'm John Klopping, and I lead global brand design at Dickies.
So on behalf of the whole TRIPTK team, we are so happy today to be talking here with John about a brand that still has a tremendous impact in culture, just as Dickies. John and I met about 1.5 years ago while working on evolving the way the Dickies brand showed up to the world. And ever since then, we've been closely working together on campaigns and specifically on designing bespoke typefaces for the brand.
Yeah, so how did we get to this partnership? Dickies was at this turning point in that we were turning 100 years old. So we knew that with the next 100 years, we would need new kind of a design thinking and a new design strategy to kind of push us forward. But we had a problem. So while the workwear category was growing, there was this issue that everything was the same in it. There was this massive sea of sameness, and we were very much swimming in it. So we'll spend the next 45 or so minutes talking about how we responded, how we chose to kind of differentiate. And we'll get a little bit weird and exploratory, but it should be fun.
Yeah, so to start talking about this and try to dissect this idea of what Genericana is, we're going to start by asking these 3 questions. How does everything look the same? Why does it happen? How is it happening right now? And how do these relationships affect the way we relate into work and into clothing as well? As John said previously, we are nowadays like deriving or sailing in a very big sea of sameness, right? Everywhere you look right now, things just seem to be like pretty similar, if not the same. I mean, I'm not just talking about branding by itself, but come on, take a look at fashion, interior design, even some packaging design. I mean, in the end, it all blends together. But I mean, we are like both creatives, and I wonder if these things really are. I mean, we are more attentive to this because we're creatives, or is there like more than that?
Yeah, I think, are we just sensitive designers is a funny question. But I think to kind of understand why everything looks the same, we need to talk about gentrification. And oftentimes people think that this means new restaurants or new shops opening up in kind of an up-and-coming part of town. But I think we have to ask at what cost and for who? Because these replacements, they aren't usually for building community. They're more for building investment portfolios. I think just recently in Chicago, a church was replaced by single-family housing. It had closed down during COVID, and now it's been replaced by something that isn't for the community. It's not this beacon of community anymore. It's something that serves very few. So there's this flip in this value structure, and really there's this dramatic loss in culture and loss in identity. And actually on the way in to Austin, my Uber driver was telling me about East Austin, and how people that have lived there for decades can't live there anymore because of gentrification.
Yeah, so speaking of serving just a few, we've been talking a lot lately about coffee shops and talking about them and how to understand this phenomena of how everything is looking the same, and I think these are great examples for their interior design. Why do we start from there?
Yeah, so coffee shops. Everyone knows them intimately well, and everyone can instantly visualize them because they all look exactly the same. And to be fair, there's a reason for this. I mean, if I were an architect or interior designer, I would want to create a space that's kind of blank for building relationships and building that community. But who decided that we needed all of the same globe light fixtures and wood accents and industrial kind of minimalist, like boho chic design? My favorite definition of gentrification is without lived experience, in that these places aren't of kind of a time or a place. They're not of the, like, they don't reflect the values of the people that live there. It's kind of completely removed from it. And Hector, I think your point of view, being from Mexico City, is incredibly interesting. Do you think this is a global phenomenon?
Yeah, I think that this is something that is actually happening everywhere. I mean, if you think back in the day, like some years ago, all the coffee shops in Mexico City, they all had their own flavor and texture. I mean, they were all using these different idiosyncrasies like handmade, sign painting. They all had bespoke interiors, and there was really this tangible personality that gave all these coffee shops their own soul and identity. And ever since 2020, the COVID started, and this movement of expats and digital nomads started to hit the city, and then you could really start to feel how things were starting to change. I mean, particularly in some of the neighborhoods near downtown, you know, like Roma Norte, Condesa, Polanco, just to name a few of them, coffee shops suddenly started to look pretty much the same, using the same like elements in their interior design. And it felt kind of weird this morning when I went to this coffee shop in downtown Austin, because everything was looking just like the coffee shop near my house in Mexico. So it's really complicated right now to tell where are you when you get inside a coffee shop, you know?
So to cope with all of this, we created a bingo game for y'all. It's Gentrification Bingo, and it's the International Cafe Edition, so it works everywhere, and you'll have all the classics, the minimalist clipboard menus, hometown references, neon signs, short beanies. So play our game as you go throughout Austin, and if you win, we'll send you a lifetime supply of Clove cigarettes.
Totally on us.
Okay, so look at this picture. It's almost like someone used our bingo card, right? This was actually created by Adobe's AI to create stock photos. It's not so much people taking them and submitting them, now it's just creating all of its own. So it's funny because we now also have machine learning to come to the same conclusions that we do.
Yeah. So what can we learn from all of this?
Yeah, so we're gonna get a little conceptual here, so hang with me, it'll be fun though. So all of these design choices, they add up to a language. Think about movies. In every shot, someone decided where it takes place, what's going on in the background, what they're wearing, or the tone of their voice. There's so much power in the adage, show, don't tell. It's the same for individuals too. How are we communicating our identities? In that I'm wearing work boots, what am I saying? What am I saying by the fit of my pants? I mean, that's rhetorical, don't answer. But all these indicators, they form identities. And this is where fashion can be powerful, and that these choices, I think, they tell people what you value. It's very much a reflection of your relationship to the world around you. Are you expressing your interests? Are you expressing your social status? Are you trying to express nothing at all?
So if our design language is a performance of identity, what does this mean to the design language of being an American, and what does it say about being a worker?
Yeah, so this is where the Americana part comes in. The phrase is American as apple pie. I'm sure we've all heard it before. It's probably the most trite example of Americana, along with kind of baseball, which was actually created in England, even though it's the American sport, but whatever. And then patriotism. So all of these visuals that you see they're ingrained in us. They immediately give us a feeling because we've seen them our entire lives. But I think that tone doesn't always equal meaning, but they're following these same tropes. There's so much history, there's so many values and so many ideas packed into something as simple as a baseball bat.
So, I mean, these images here, they're pretty iconic, right? What's the purpose of what the purpose are they serving, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, it's a good and kind of hard question to answer. But I think anytime you see advertisements or imagery like this, you have to ask yourself three things. What does it want me to believe? What does it want me to do? And why do they want me to do it? And what values do these images prop up? And to your question, what did it mean to be an American over the last 100 years? You'll see that it's very much influenced by wartime. I mean, surviving hard times, the kind of providing for your nuclear family. And to be fair, it was accurate of the time. Maybe not so much now, but there's this really strong sense of individual responsibility over kind of other collectivism that other cultures have. This very strong sense of stoic resilience, which you'll see here. And think about the impact a figure like John Wayne has had on our culture. Kind of how do we buy into these stories and retell them?
So again, here are some pretty similar pictures, but now they are more grounded up to these present times. I mean, you can still see a lot of coincidences. There's always this strong, rugged white man doing all for himself.
Yeah, then what happens when you take, what happens when you take workwear out of the factory or out of the farm and ranch? How does the meaning change, I think is a really interesting question. So I mentioned how fashion can be a form of communication, but I don't think that always means that it's communicating something useful. This is a really helpful illustration of how far white-collar work has been removed from true labor. I mean, all of these garments that were made for a utilitarian purpose, the form is completely removed the form is completely removed from the function.
So yeah, to put it more simple, are these fashion models ever working on an offshore oil rig? You'll see how far things have come now, and I'm not making fun of anyone wearing a workwear jacket, sorry. Don't worry. Yeah, so reappropriation can also be a really, really strong tool, though. You know, you'll see some similarities in this slide with the previous one, and I'm talking about how the function is being divorced. You know, some fashion designers like Willy Chavarria, with whom Dickies made a collaboration recently, they really can use their design to talk about cultures and to tell complex histories about them. This, like the way these fits look, they kind of remind me a lot to Pachuco outfits, or how you call them here in America, the zoot suits. I mean, this style was born in the dance halls of the 1930s, and then it was quickly appropriated by the Mexican Americans in the 1940s. And you can see its influence, it's still tangible right now with, just take a look at how some of these skaters wear their clothes nowadays, with all this excessive fabric and all these loose fits. So we've said that everything around us is a result of decisions, right? But who are the people making these decisions, and why are they making them? I mean, you all must be thinking, I mean, Hector and John, you're both designers. Aren't these two the guys that are doing all this to us?
I think that's fair. I think anytime we ask ourselves, how did this happen, or why did this happen, a better question that we should be asking is, what are the conditions that made this happen?
Yeah, so three things come to my mind when you ask that question. I mean, the first one is that we are perpetually in an hyper-growth mode. The second one, it's that our tools have changed over time. And then the third one is that we are more and more nowadays being alienated from the product of our work. So let's talk a little bit more on what's this hyper-growth mode, right? I mean, for those savvy entrepreneurs out there that are spinning up new brands, what piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think I'd ask them to, dear God, please stop. Most of the time, we don't need them to. The problems that creatives like you and me are often asked to solve are how to stand out in a space of void of differentiation. It's like all of these brands are all screaming at you at the same time in the same room asking for attention. So we're inventing a problem, and then we're spending all of our resources trying to solve for it. And I think if you take the model that tech companies often use, the MVP model, where you'll have a minimum viable product that you'll release to the public, they'll use it, it'll get tested, you'll get feedback, and there are all these rolling changes to make it better. I think that that's a really interesting model that more brands can look at, and that the consumers will give you feedback and you can make your brand better for the people that use it, instead of just throwing it out and inventing a new one, or people switching brands on you. And you might be wondering, well, John, you work for an apparel company, which I'm clearly skeptical of most brands. Growth is always present, but I think there's a reason Dickies has lasted so long, in that we provide genuine, not perceived value. We sell $30 pants that last 10 years.
Yeah, talking about perceived value, enter liquid death. You know, everyone loves when new brands just show up in the market, but it seems that nowadays you can't even scroll through LinkedIn without everyone just hyping over it, right? You know, people seem to believe that they've cracked the code with this one.
Yeah, and maybe they have to a degree, to be fair. I mean, they have a brand identity that everyone wants to work on. It's disruptive, it's fun, it's unpretentious. And I think if this brand were to be for anyone, it would be for me. I grew up listening to metal. I mean, just look at the packaging. But I think what people forget to ask sometimes is, did they ever need to exist in the first place? Did we ever need a water brand to reflect our identities? Because they're cashing in on perceived value by appropriating a subculture to then, in some ways, sell you something that comes out of your sink. And like, yeah, I know not everyone has clean drinking water, but if you don't, you're not subsisting on liquid death. It's about stealing market share. It's this kind of perfect reflection of what we create in our marketing echo chambers in this feedback loop. And I think as soon as we start seeing as advertisements as entertainment, the sooner we'll lose sight of how real culture can fulfill us. Yeah, so the absolute chaos created by hypergrowth has left us with a gambling problem. So how many brands will be started this year alone? How much money does it cost to start each one? A couple $1 million? 95 or some crazy statistic, most of them fail. So instead of making things better for people, you're trying to reinvent the wheel to kind of justify your MBA to CEO track. Sorry. As my former creative director, Matt Lambert, says, slow is fast. And you'll see the kind of pressure of hypergrowth and how it affects something like product packaging for a very specific example. I know I would rather buy the one on the right. So what happens is creatives like me and Hector will go into meetings to pitch creative work, and we spend so much time designing that I think we have a lot of brain space to think about, like, how do we make a brand better? How do we make a design better? How do we make a better experience for the consumer? So we'll go into these meetings, and we really want to do it right this time. Like, we think we figured it out, but there's always this push and pull, of course. We don't always get what we want. So we see that it's a sliding scale. On the left, it's more predictable, safe, it's hyper-growth oriented in that it doesn't take any risks. Like, who are you going to offend with this Hershey's wrapper? Well, on the opposite end, you have something that's kind of bespoke and inspiring, and it's impact oriented. I mean, being hyper-growth oriented versus Tony's Chocolonely, which is spending a lot of the resources to make cacao trade more equitable for everyone in its fair trade practices. And it's also trying to eliminate slave labor, what's effectively slave labor in the cocoa trade. So I think we can't really forget what the brands stand for. And I think this is how we help consumers can make better decisions, is by even looking at the packaging like this.
A lot to think about, right? Okay, so we've talked about how ideologies can shape culture, right? But how have our tools and resources are modifying the way we create and the way we work right now? If you think 50 or 60 years ago, the processes for creating, let's say, a label or a box, a piece of chocolate packaging, were pretty much different from what they are right now. I mean, you have to work with a huge amount of people in order to get this result. I mean, the work had to be split into a graphic artist, a copywriter, a typographer, a colorist, a printer, just to name a few of them. You have to be like really conscious about art, about design. Obviously, you have to know like lots of things about visual hierarchies and composition, and even a little bit of grammar. I mean, there was practically no room for error, because if you just made a mistake, it would just mean that the process would have to be redone all over from the beginning, which kind of meant money losing, and also time losing. So, I mean, just imagine there was no Command Z button back in the day. But I mean, nowadays we are full with lots of options of tools. I mean, they're more abundant than ever, and they're also more user-friendly than ever. Some people say that design has been democratized these days. And if you think about it, in a way, it has, because, I mean, the work that was previously done by a huge amount of people can now all be done by one single individual, or a one-man band, as I like to call.
Yeah, and I used to think it was the case that creatives are only as good as their toolbox, and this applies to all sorts of creations, but the kind of patterns and jigs that you use very much dictate what comes out. So in the last 5 or so years, I would say there's been this massive boom in design resources. They've very much been commodified. So you'll have fonts, stock photos, and inspiration. I think a lot of people talk about the Pinterestification effect of creative work that people see, or the mood board effect. And I think where all that comes from is I'm constantly getting advertisements for these resources in my inbox, email, social media. So you have to think about the fact that people use what's at their fingertips, use resources you can find. So whoever's actually paying the most for paid media to get these resources in front of you are very much affecting what we use, which then affects what comes out in the real world.
Well, it sounds kind of terrible, to be honest, right?
Yeah, so to be fair, I mean, I don't know how I would exist without these. It really gives us a way to kind of cope with the incredibly harsh deadlines, it gives us a resource to deal with this constant need for newness when we're spinning up new brands.
Yeah, I kind of get your point now. Well, I think it all had to have a bright side in the end, right? Yeah, now that we're talking about tools and how have they evolved through time, I know we can't go a day or even an hour right now without talking about artificial intelligence, right? I mean, we're in 2024.
Yeah, so let's take what we talked about before, the kind of language of imagery. And you'll see here, we use Midjourney, and we simply asked it to imagine Americana. And you'll see all of the original inputs from all of the other images that we looked at before. You have the same codes and tropes, but they're just reorganized and kind of spit out in different ways because these tools truly aren't thinking for themselves yet. Also, oddly enough, I don't know why it only showed women. I know that using Midjourney, a lot of the images that it was fed to kind of, so essentially it started with a set of images, right? And then it's actually generating more and more every single day to give it new variations, iterations to find. So I'll put in something like, I put in the term, imagine graphic design, just to see what would come out. And it came out with portraits somehow. So it's really interesting to see that they're all kind of portraits to a degree, many of them are. And also that it's only showing women.
Well, I guess maybe that has to do with Americana being the Spanish term for female American.
Could be. I think the funny thing about people, they'll say AI is going to take us to this point of singularity. I think tech-wise, that's a whole other conversation. But in terms of creative work, people say it's going to lose like all of its touch and all of its humanity. But I think it's funny because if you look at Americana and Genericana, we never needed AI to do it for us because we've been doing it to ourselves the entire time. Even Google's machine learning technology, it's supposed to be able to interpret images in this new way, which I think it does to a degree. But the fact is that it's still powered by humans in a lot of ways. For it to understand what's in an image, it requires abysmally paid offshore workers to spend countless hours tagging them. So it's just so interesting that it's still human-powered, and I think it's this really great, it makes abundantly clear that our relationship with our work has fundamentally changed, and like we're talking about, the tools have changed with it.
Yeah, so as you said, our relationship to work has been changing over time, but how has it changed? You know, going back to those American values from that American imagery we just showed some previous slides ago, the one with the advertisements, I mean, they were all showing these ideas or these values like strength, work, production, and taking action. Where are these topics coming over and over again?
Yeah, and you'll see it today in a very aspirational way still. But to be fair, when all of these kind of images, when we first started seeing them, it was more true to that time and that place because people were so much more intimately close to their work and the output of it. I mean, most of your day was spent doing physical labor. So I think, let's take our lives again, because I think we're good examples. We're designers, we'll sit behind a computer, oftentimes remotely, and then we'll create assets that get uploaded to a server hosted elsewhere, so a shopper elsewhere can make a purchase, so then a distribution center elsewhere can send something to you, or it can be assembled from components from elsewhere, assembled and shipped elsewhere. Like, you get the idea, but we're so, most of us in this room, I imagine, are just so far removed from how our work materially impacts our lives in a very immediate way.
Yeah, I can relate to that story. So it's pretty clear right now that work means something pretty different to all of us that spend most of our days and nights behind a computer or behind a desk, right? But what does this all have to do with workwear and many of the people wearing it?
Yeah, so we'll have to go back a little bit into history to kind of talk about, I mean, Dickies and what was happening in America at the time. So in the 20s and 30s, people lived in rural areas and they began moving to the city during the Roaring 20s. Product design, especially Dickies at that time, was solely about durability and quality, and that most people only had one or two changes of clothing. I mean, compare that to, what's the statistic now, that most people that buy fast fashion will wear a garment less than 10 times before discarding it. And it's, I mean, obviously,
that's insane.
Has not always been that way. So production in the United States at that time was focused on producing automobiles and vacuum cleaners and radios. But then the Great Depression hit, and then frugality became more important than ever. Oddly enough, Dickies was one of few brands to grow during the Great Depression because what we created was such a necessity. And then you see marketing at this time in the top left, we released what were called ad slicks, and then soon came radio, but I mean, very different from what we see today. And these are all images from different eras, but I would say in and around the 50s. So then after the Great Depression, World War II happens, where we actually stopped consumer-facing production, and we're making 16 million uniforms for those enlisted and was drafted into the Army. So then World War II ended, and people began to move home, and we had the GI Bill, which made it so you could get low interest rate loans for buying a house or for going to school. So you'll see how our product and our advertisements really followed that cultural shift, and then we started creating more casual wear, and we started selling to youth and to women. And I think we can't really move on without saying, I'm glad that we and other brands have made some progress on how we portray women and kind of gender roles in advertisements. We're not perfect yet, but I think it's worth saying. But really what was happening is this kind of move from rural to urban. The product followed and design followed, and so did kind of the culture of Dickies to a degree. So you'll see here some more recent advertisements in the top left. You'll see young Susan Sarandon, which is pretty fun. But what was really interesting is that we always focused on selling workwear. We had some TV ads, but we never really tried hard to be part of popular culture, like you'll see a lot of brands doing today. What was even more cool was you'll see NWA and Tupac, Blink-182, these kind of like music subcultures, maybe not subcultures, but these music cultures naturally wearing our products. Like we never asked them to wear it, because I think in many ways, if you're a musician, it's often pretty working class. Like our product was affordable, it worked, and thankfully some cool people started wearing it, so it became cool too. And then skateboarding, I mean, I think it was a natural choice for them because it's durable and it's loose.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I did skateboard since I was a teenager and so until my late 20s, and I did use these Dickies pants because they were comfortable and durable, and I swear this is no paid ad.
Yeah, I think anytime that a brand tries to, I mean, there's so many new brands today, people have to kind of invent reasons why they're relevant or why you should choose them over another. But I think what's so cool about us is that, again, we were naturally adopted, because I think as soon as you start asking to be relevant, the sooner people will see it and you'll be seen as an outsider. Okay, so I got some time in the archives at the Dickies headquarters in Fort Worth, and it's a couple rooms just full of boxes, full of old film. Honestly, there's so much stuff in there that our archivists haven't been able to go through it all yet. But on the wall was this phrase: use it up, wear it out, make do, or do without. Because like I said, people only had 1 or 2 changes of clothing. But there's so much history in these. I mean, look at the way that it's been sewn over and over, and look at all the patches. I mean, it's really fun to think about what kind of work did they do, and how did that particular work stress their garment? I mean, it's fun to think about what are all the things that this person probably built in their lifetime. Last thing on that, our chief archivist, Anne Richardson, she's wonderful, so interesting, so many good stories. But she said, when I was in the archive, she said, other brands these days, they don't have soul. Dickies pants have soul. And I think you can really see it in that pair of coveralls there. Okay, so let's reset a little bit. Designing against Genericana, here are the challenges that we had and our kind of solutions to them. So 1, stuck in hypergrowth, and we need to slow down. 2, our tools have changed, so I think we need to think really critically about how we use them. And then 3, we're alienated from our work. So I don't feel like most people, again, us in this room, probably don't know what it really feels like to do labor. We don't really know what it feels like, smells like, tastes like to do it. And I think we'll talk about that again in a little bit. I'm excited.
So on behalf of your 100th birthday as a brand, we started this partnership, the creative team at Dickies and the creative team at TRIPTK. We started this really cool journey on trying to evolve Dickies and how people see the brand, because I mean, we have another 100 years ahead, and we wanted to improve this part of a brand. So I mean, the work we did as a whole team, it was so deep and also so much fun. I mean, just think about going inside those Dickies archives and just digging into all the history of the brand. I mean, it was pretty cool. But also thinking about these other workwear brands, I mean, they hardly are gonna be with us the next 5 or so years, right? So we had to start by thinking, and how can we stand strong in front of all their distractions? But also, how can we move forward without using prestige as a crutch? I mean, we had this idea that in order to look forward, you had to look backwards. So that's why we got into the archives.
Yeah, so back to the archives for a little bit. You'll see Anne Richardson in the top left, and then another one of our archivists, Corinna Wright, in the bottom left. And again, there's just so many stories. There's so much packed into it. But really, we spent all of our time talking about workwear and its history, kind of the American worker, most of all, and then a little bit of advertising. But it was really like, what did the life of an American look like that wore workwear in the last 100 years?
Yeah, so coming back to Dickies' revamp, we totally had to take a look at its very iconic logo, right?
Yeah, and like I said, we were at this turning point in the brand where 100 years of history, what do we do for the next? And we knew how important it was. A lot of us were new to the company. We knew our number one goal was that we had all this history and heritage, and I think it's a little risky. We knew we couldn't fuck it up because there was so much built into it. So we never actually thought that we would update or change the logo, but I think what happened was, though, if you look at all of the time, all of the designers, people touching the logo, like all the different files it's been in, the different tools it's probably been rendered in, all the pieces, like the typography, the shapes, like the little dots that you'll see in the horseshoe, it all shifted over time, like in a game of telephone. So I think we had to take the logo apart and ask ourselves, what is the function of each piece of it? What are we doing with the colors? Why are we choosing them? Are we choosing to keep this like 60-degree inclination of the letters? What about the kind of inconsistent spacing? But the thing is, there's so much kind of history and heritage in a logo, and not that an entire brand identity is in a logo, but I think there really is in ours.
Yeah, so to start this work, we took apart the Dickies wordmark from the whole logo lockup and started to see all these inconsistencies that John just talked about. I mean, the letters were having like different inclinations, they have like different thickness in the strokes, and also the spacing was uneven. And we knew we had to work on this in order for the logo to be more readable, but also we needed it to feel more coherent and cohesive. And at the end of the day, we got this pretty neat result, but it was looking still very stiff, and it kind of had lost its soul in a way. So we thought about how all these people back in the day using Dickies were making all the job by themselves, by hand, and we really thought of this idea of, hey, what would happen if we just drew the letters by hand? And so we did, and we really liked the outcome of this, and then we decided, hey, why don't we design a full typeface out of this idea? So here's the typeface that we designed for the brand. And it's called Big Text, before our beloved Texas mascot, Big Text. Can you tell us a little bit more about Big Text, Jen?
Yeah, I always make the mistake thinking everyone knows who Big Text is, but it turns out that's not the case. He's kind of an American icon. You can find him at the State Fair in Texas. He's a 30-foot tall man wearing a 3-story tall Dickies suit. He was in an X-Men comic at one point, and he was in King of the Hill. So I think he's in and around culture, whether or not you know it. Yeah, so he's like very much this caricature of Americana for us. So we wanted to do him justice by naming our typeface after him.
Yeah, so here it is, side by side, Big Text and Big Text. Ownability in the face of Genericana, right? So here's a little comparative of the improvements we did to the logo. If you pay close attention, the colors were changed. I mean, we not only worked on the typeface design, but we also managed to make this new, the new logo or the new brand. It had to have like more kind of a human touch, right?
Yeah, and if you don't mind going back, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got like 3 extra outlines around it. It's just really bizarre. But anyway, like a brand's identity isn't just in its logo. It's the kind of entire identity and everything else that you build around it. I think that's really who makes us who we are. So we'll look at that in a second as we look at kind of video on how we create other campaign work. Cool. So made by humans, very much a brand ethos for us and this kind of North Star that we want to be driving to. And the idea is to really capture what work means and like kind of what it feels like, because I think today everyone uses studios, which really want to put out this high quality product, of course. But really what it does is, again, it flattens everything. Everything looks the same. It's like, oh, that's so crisp and clean and perfect. Great job. But it doesn't feel like a human made it, you know? I think that heavy production has really lost the effect that it used to have. But I think if we ask ourselves, what does it look like what if you gave the camera to the person who's doing the labor next to them? What if you gave it to another human being and not someone who has been trained how to use a camera for 30 years? And I think it creates a really different effect, and I think it's much more human and relatable.
Yeah, they really have this human, tangible touch.
Yeah, so this is our art director, Ryan Stevens, who's in the back there. So what he'll do is he'll mount several different cameras to a monopod, and that just gives this imperfect point of view, and you have like the different nature and quality of Ryan's giggling back there. I don't know what's going on. But it really gives you this like imperfect nature to the quality of the video, and you'll have different cameras, and it creates a bit of mixed media effect. So again, it doesn't look like this high-end studio made it. But having our own typeface doesn't mean we're stuck in a box, though. So again, we worked with TRIPTK and Hector to create campaign-specific typefaces, because big text is going to take us really far, but it's not perfect for every situation. So what we did is we looked at hand-painted signs in and around the communities that built lowriders, because we were spinning up a campaign that was called Respect the Classics, focusing on lowriders. So here you'll see lowrider, Hector and TRIPTK's typeface, and I think it goes perfectly with the video that we captured there too. And I think what's also super interesting about the lowrider community is, just like the hip-hop community, we were naturally adopted. We never asked to be part of the lowrider community. And actually, it wasn't until people like these guys they were getting their pants cut and then hemmed to be 13 inches long, because we didn't make the 13-inch short. But then we saw such a heavy demand from a subculture that we're like, instead of them paying someone else to do it, why don't we just create it ourselves? So I thought that was really interesting, and also we really didn't want to get in the way when we go on these productions, because we know that no one gives a shit what Dickies thinks about the lowrider community, but they do give a shit about the artists and the people that make the car and the cars themselves. I think that if we create something that looks like marketing, we're getting in the way.
Yeah, well, I think you have left everyone just worried sick about big text burning on our intro slide, right? I mean, what happened there?
Yeah, sorry about that. So he tragically burned down in an electrical fire. We lost Corinna's 3-story tall Dickies suit, which is a piece of art on its own. But don't worry, we rebuilt him, and he's better than ever, even though he's still terrifying.
Good to know. He's all right. So, with all of this, did we manage to escape Genericana?
Yeah, I mean, Dickies is a workwear brand, kind of born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas. I think Americana will always be in our blood, but what I hope we can do is be the cool uncle to Americana and not its washed-up stepdad.
Yeah. So, how can we avoid falling into the same traps that have turned Americana into what it is these days?
Yeah, so here's a little cheat sheet for y'all. I would say don't look to marketing for inspiration, the kind of feedback loops created by corporations and hypergrowth. Look at the archives. I realize that I am pretty privileged to work for a heritage brand. Not everyone has that. But the point is to not forget how we got here. And then don't bat a trend. Fuck your contrived Pantone colors of the year. Look at the bigger picture. Talk to human beings. And make and absorb culture, art, film, music. I don't know how we can make creative work without doing that. But to be honest, it seems like it's forgotten oftentimes. And then stand for something and actually do it. I think people can see through brands' bullshit these days when it's like in their brand values and it's written down somewhere. It's probably on their wall in their office, but do they actually do the thing? And then the last note, and it's more something to leave y'all with, it's less of a call to action, but I think that a brand is only as good as what it contributes to the world.
Well, so thank you very much for joining us in this little fireside chat. We're opening a little space for Q&A, so if anyone wants to participate, just come over by the microphone.
And one other note, so I believe they're outside the door on a back table. We actually have prints of what you saw, the art that you saw in the beginning, and on the back is a gentrification bingo card that you can take for yourself so you can play your game. I don't know if we'll really send you clove cigarettes, but reach out and we'll see what we can do. Go for it. Looks
Yeah.
like we have two. Do you want to go first? And then you sitting down second? Is that good?
Yeah, that's okay.
Thank you so much, Hector and John. Such a treat to go on the journey through the archives with you and can really see how Made by Humans is just showing up in the present work. My question is about AI. So obviously it's quite an emergent technology still, and the Mid-Journey expression is still living very much in this uncanny valley, kind of spooky, doesn't look quite real yet. I'm curious, do you think that the machines will start to replicate those kind of human imperfections? Will there be a juncture where we can no longer differentiate between that kind of texture that you so beautifully captured here and the machine output? And if yes, what will that mean for us creatives?
What do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that artificial intelligence, it's learning more and more quickly these days. I mean, if you take a look at 3 or 4 years ago, like the videos and the images made by AI, they kind of looked like strange and creepy in a way, and they were easily, I mean, you could easily tell that, come on, this wasn't made by a person, right? But as we talked, like the inputs are being made by humans with flesh and bone. So as time passes by, I think that maybe artificial intelligence may be doing things more real, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are having like a soul. As you just mentioned, like these humans' imperfections, I think artificial intelligence is going the other way around, just trying to make things like way much perfect, even more perfect than they are in reality. So maybe it's gonna be like kind of different, because I believe that we could easily tell when something was made by artificial intelligence because of its perfectiveness, more or less.
Yeah, I think that's true. I feel like, again, our tools have been changing over time for so long that I feel like people have probably been asking this question forever, is like, the better the tools get, what jobs are we going to lose, and how are we going to lose the human touch? And I think it will. You can probably type in, I want the Dickies logo and this stippling style of illustration or art, and it'll probably be able to spit it out in a beautiful way. But I think, you have like Sora creating videos that most of the time look pretty damn real, but I think the reason why we get paid as creatives and the reason why people value us is our ability to connect the dots. Connect the dots is to bring all of the ideas together of like understanding, again, art, culture, film, art history. There's so many ideas that I think are so abstract that we can put into elegant solutions and conclusions that we can come to, that the kind of like recursive, I guess AI is not really using recursive logic, but I don't think it can't connect the same dots that we can. So yes, it will look like it, but I don't think it can create the things that we ultimately do.
Thank you.
Hi guys, thanks for your presentation. And John, as the CEO of an agency called History Factory, that's a brand heritage and archives agency, thank you for touting the importance of heritage and archives. The question I had was with respect to the theme of Americana and how you all have leveraged that sort of theme as part of the brand. How have you seen that translate globally in terms of what aspects of Americana and brand heritage has impact and influence for the brand and for consumers globally? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there are some aspects to Americana that we consider to be ours, but for example, our EMEA region in Europe, they're doing a farm-to-table story. And like that to us really feels like Americana, but to them, it's just like great food, responsibly raised, going to a restaurant, being really well prepared. So I don't think that we've been actively trying to say, how do we take Americana and push it out to the rest of the world? I think it's kind of naturally following these same ideas of being a worker, of being a laborer. And I think really everything that we want to do is to kind of champion the working class. And if we do that, no matter what form it's in, like the service industry, it doesn't matter. As long as we focus on that, I think it'll feel like Dickies and it'll feel like our version of Americana.
How's it going? Thank you so much for that presentation, really inspirational. I'm here representing a skincare brand, an American skincare brand called Camille Beckman, and it's been around since 1986, so we're about to approach our 40th anniversary. We've never been really good about holding or organizing our archives, but there's closets full of documents and things and images. The brand was started in a small house in Boise, Idaho, and now they produce and manufacture everything in their own factory. What is a foundational point we can take right now? What are some things that we can start right now so we can be ahead of the curve when it comes down to 2026, which will be the 40th anniversary of the brand?
That's a really hard question, and I can't honestly say that I can answer it in an incredibly helpful way. What I've noticed, though, is like we have Anne. She's worked at Dickies for 50 years. So I would say, where's your institutional knowledge? How are you saving it? And how are you saving it in a way that you can leverage it later? Because I think that's honestly something that we've run into is we have all this stuff in the archives and we haven't even been through it all. We have 40 hours of film that we haven't been able to digitize yet. So I think thinking about, I think about how I store my files, like what system am I creating to make it leverageable in the future? Does that answer it? I mean, maybe the best I can.
That's a good foundation. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. So I'm from Philadelphia, and the Dickies suit is right up there next to the cheesesteak and the Liberty Bell. So I was just wondering, has Dickies ever considered the option of like kind of further diving into that cultural impact, like authentically, almost like a Carhartt WIP alongside the actual kind of workwear brand?
Yeah, fun fact, some of you might already know this, but Carhartt Work in Progress isn't actually Carhartt. It's just they're giving their logo to a licensee who's using the Carhartt logo. So it's funny because we're often compared to them, but Carhartt WIP is actually just a different entity who pays for the logo. But I think it's a good question, and that was a lot of what we talked about at the turning point of our brand, in that we were 100, so now what do? How do we, everyone wants to grow. How do we find a new consumer, and how do you do that with the Dickies suit? How do you do that in fashion? And to be honest, I don't think it's been nailed yet in terms of our business strategy. I feel like that's kind of the million-dollar question, right? Is how do you do it in a way that retains our history and heritage and doesn't kind of turn away all the people who've always loved us for what we've been? But also, how do we think about new marketplaces, new consumers? Did that answer the question? I think there's a lot there. Promise, did I really answer it? Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Adria. I'm a journalist locally here, but I'm from a border town. And I really wanted to ask, I don't know if you all know where the Valley is, but it's kind of like South Padre Island. And Dickies is a huge brand with particularly Latina women. And I wanted to ask specifically around that. You mentioned the lowrider community, but I didn't see, any women represented in that snippet. So you mentioned about getting in the, how do I say, kind of like not trying to get in the way of culture, but how do you celebrate the fact that a whole ethnicity really, like you said, adopted the brand?
Yeah, incredibly good question. And I don't think anything we've done is perfect. We ended up working with some people who someone on our team had a connection with, and unfortunately there weren't any women in the shop. But I think you're totally right. Well, if you look at our social media, we posted a few images recently of women standing next to lowriders wearing the Dickies suit, and those posts blew up. So you're absolutely onto something. I think something that Dickies has always not been the best about, and something that we need to continue to get better about, is showing women in these situations, because they're clearly also a part of the same community. I think we could have done better, to be honest.
Could say as well. So I don't have a pair of Dickies because accessibility is tough for me. And I've never seen this, but do y'all make petite sizes? Because I really want a jumpsuit. But do y'all make petite sizes?
Does any of the Dickies people here know? I don't think we do. We have a lot of big and tall, but I don't know if we do petite.
I think we sometimes make them in short length.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because jumpsuits were all the rage in pandemic time. And I'm low income, so shit, You're trying to look for, like you said, affordable pieces, but Dickies, I want to say the jumpsuits is like 98. So that's still not really affordable, but I understand wanting to reuse it and reuse it and reuse it, to get your money worth.
Yeah, I mean,
But
not a whole lot.
petite sizes.
I'll pass it along, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was really inspiring and very cool. I love the Dickies brand and how much you have kind of disrupted the market with your branding. I'm curious, in a world where the algorithm rules and it's such a formulaic approach to how do you get your brand noticed. It's like, post this number of reels or whatever, be on this platform. What do you think is the most authentic platform and approach to showing up as a brand that's different and differentiating?
Let me think for a second. Hector, do you have any opinions? I've been taking the mic. I'm not just punting, so you have to answer it. I'll also try to answer.
No, it's okay. Personally, I think that maybe using really close apps like TikTok, for example, where you're showcasing like how people are wearing the stuff we do like every day in like common day situations. I think that maybe it can help to make the communication more like human in a way and not that much like algorithm based or algorithm created in order for it to be like viewed over and over again. But yeah, I think that maybe using that platform or maybe Instagram Reels instead of just uploading a picture of a model wearing the clothes. Also, this idea that we started working on ever since this rebranding project started, we took this idea of made by humans and suddenly changed our approach and how to take like all the pictures and all the content for the media. I mean, we started to, as John said previously, start to look back at the communities and at the people, the workers that are actually using the brand for what it is intended, and then started to go over there and just capture what they're doing every day wearing the brand. So I think that really makes it feel more real and not just post.
Yeah, Hector's 100% right, I think. And I'm no social media expert. I'm a designer by trade. I don't have a good answer to that because I think a lot of what we talked about here was to say, like, how do we avoid bowing to trend? How do we avoid just having to feed into the same algorithm? And I think we're, again, in a privileged position where we have people that follow us already. We don't need to create relevance. So at least in my opinion, it's how do you keep representing the cultures that have adopted you? How do you keep championing the working class? How do you do this in a sustainable way that feels real and tells stories that people care about and that you can add value to? And I'm not saying that every campaign we do achieves that because, like I said before, everything's a sliding scale. But how do you provide ongoing value in an authentic way to the people that really do trust and value you? I know that doesn't really probably give you the answer for you to take back to use, but that's
No, that's great. I think it does feel like such a balance between using the tools that are at your fingertips. And it's like, obviously TikTok is one of the largest platforms and does allow you to be seen. But I think there is some, I personally feel resistance towards it's the biggest thing right now, and jumping on the train of it. And so, but it's good to hear okay, that does still feel like worthwhile, even for a brand that is saying hey, let's disrupt this. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was a really good question. How do you show that it's working? If you want to take the slow method and build a brand that's authentic and real and tell these stories, that it means it's not following the trends, which means it's not giving you really clear KPIs and you don't see the return anytime soon. So how do you keep arguing to do that for a brand that doesn't have all the history we do? I think it's incredibly hard. So it's a balancing act for sure.
Well, so again, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us here. Thanks for your attention and your time.
Thanks so much.